A bus packed with National Youth Service Corps, NYSC members, who had just completed their year-long service in a rural village, met with a horrific accident on their way back to their hometowns, all because of one careless choice. Here's how it unfolded. In a small, quiet village surrounded by fields of green and dotted with mud brick homes, a group of NYSC members lived and worked at the local high school. These young Corps members, often called corpers, brought energy to the community. They were always full of life, their laughter echoing through the schoolyard as they taught lessons, graded papers, and built friendships with the villagers. The locals welcomed them warmly, sharing meals of yam porridge and stories under the shade of ancient trees. But as the months stretched on, the corpers' curiosity about their temporary home grew stronger. They began to explore beyond the school and the familiar paths, eager to uncover more about the village that had become their world for a year. One bright afternoon, with the sun high and the air warm, the corpers took a walk along the village's dusty trails. Their sandals kicked up small clouds of red earth as they chatted and pointed at sights. A goat nibbling grass, a woman balancing a water pot on her head. Then they stumbled upon something grand, the king's palace. Its tall gates rose like sentinels, carved with intricate patterns of animals and symbols that told tales of the village's past. Statues of warriors stood guard, their stone faces weathered but proud. The group paused, struck by the sight, their voices dropping to whispers of admiration. But one object caught their eyes more than the rest, a golden crown displayed inside the palace, resting on a wooden stand. Its shine was dazzling, like the sun captured in metal, casting a glow that seemed to pull them closer. "It's real gold," said Nonso, one of the corpers, his voice low but thick with excitement. His eyes gleamed with a hunger that set him. Apart from the others, he was the greediest of the bunch. "Do you know how much this could fetch in the city?" he asked, already picturing the wealth it could bring. Another corper, Kemi, shook her head firmly. "Don't even think about it," she warned, her tone sharp but steady. "I've heard stories about this village. They say the king's crown is guarded by charms and spirits. No one who takes it lives to tell the tale." Her words carried the weight of caution, rooted in the rumors she'd picked up from the villagers over the year. But Nonso just laughed, a loud, bold sound that brushed off her concern. "Charms? Spirits? Those are just tales to scare kids," he said, his pride swelling. "This crown is our chance at riches." Some of the corpers felt a flicker of temptation, their minds drifting to what that gold could buy. New clothes, a better home, a life beyond their modest salaries. Others, though, felt unease settle in their chests. "We shouldn't touch it," Kemi pleaded, her voice soft but firm. "The village honors its traditions. Let's not invite trouble." Her plea was simple. Respect the place that had housed them, fed them, and treated them as kin. But Nonso's mind was made up. "If you're too afraid, that's fine," he shot back, his grin sharp. "I'm taking it. And when I'm rich, don't come asking me for a share." His words hung in the air, a challenge no one dared to meet. The days ticked by, and the end of their service approached. The corpers spent their final moments in the village packing bags, exchanging goodbyes with students and planning their journeys home. But while the others focused on leaving with fond memories, Nonso had other plans. On their last night, when the sky was dark and the stars seemed to hide behind a blanket of clouds, he made his move. The village lay still, its usual hum of voices and footsteps silenced by sleep. With two other corpers, drawn in by the lure of quick cash, Nonso crept toward the palace. The gates loomed in the shadows, but they found a side entrance, unguarded and quiet. Inside, the crown sat on its stand, glowing faintly even in the dimness, like a prize waiting to be claimed. "It's even prettier up close," one of the corpers whispered, his voice shaky with nerves and awe. "Hurry," Nonso urged, his hands swift as he grabbed the crown and stuffed it into a black plastic bag. "Let's get out of here." They slipped back into the night, hearts racing but steps silent, the weight of their theft hidden in the bag. The next morning, as the corpers gathered to board a chartered bus, Kemi spotted the bag in Nonso's hand. Her eyes widened, a mix of disbelief and dread washing over her. "You didn't," she gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. Nonso grinned, his pride unmistakable. "We did," he said, lifting the bag slightly. "And I'm not giving it back." Kemi's face tightened with worry. "You're making a mistake," she warned, her words urgent. "You don't understand this village or what you've done." She'd spent the year listening, learning the villagers' ways, their respect for the king, their belief in unseen forces. But Nonso shrugged her off, his confidence unshaken. "Mistake? The only mistake was not taking it earlier," he said, turning away. The bus filled with corpers, their chatter light and cheerful as they waved to the villagers lining the road. The locals smiled back, their hands raised in farewell, unaware of the theft that had taken place under their noses. Kemi and a few others murmured prayers for a safe trip, their voices soft but earnest. Nonso and his two accomplices, though, laughed at her caution, teasing her with calls of "Mummy Kemi" as they settled into the back seats. Nonso slid the bag beneath his chair, his smug smile fixed in place. He could already see the city ahead, the crown's gold turning into stacks of cash, but as the bus rolled away, the crown's faint glow stayed hidden, a quiet witness to the greed that had set their path. The bus rumbled along the uneven road, carrying the corpers away from the village they'd called home. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the dry, reddish soil. Inside, the air buzzed with talk and laughter as the group swapped stories about their service. Tough days in the classroom, late nights grading, funny moments with the kids. Nonso sat at the back, quieter than the rest, his hands resting on the bag under his seat. The crown inside seemed to hum with a strange energy, a feeling only he noticed, though he pushed it aside. Suddenly, the bus jolted hard, lurching to a stop with a groan that silenced the chatter. "What's going on?" one corper asked, peering out the window. "The bus has broken down," the driver muttered, climbing out to check. Sweat beaded on his brow as he lifted the hood, poking at the engine with a frown. Hours dragged on under the blazing sun, the corpers fanning themselves with notebooks as the driver worked, grumbling about worn parts and bad luck. Finally, the engine sputtered back to life, and a cheer rose from the group as they rolled forward again. But the relief didn't last. A sharp pop cut through the noise. A tire had burst. The driver sighed, his face creasing with irritation as he stepped out to fix it, whispering prayers for strength. The corpers grew restless, wiping sweat from their faces and shifting in their seats as the heat pressed down. No one paid much mind to Nonso's bag or the crown tucked inside, its presence a secret casting an invisible shadow over them all. With the tire patched, the bus moved on, the road stretching out beneath its wheels. But as the miles passed, a hush settled over the group. The warm breeze that had felt pleasant now carried a chill, an odd shift no one could explain. Nonso glanced around, a flicker of nerves in his chest, but he kept silent, gripping his bag tighter. Then, without warning, the brakes gave out. The driver's shouts pierced the air as he wrestled with the wheel, his hands frantic. "Hold on!" he yelled, but the corper's screams drowned him out. The bus veered wildly, tires screeching before it plunged into a deep ditch. The crash was deafening. Metal crumpled, glass shattered, and dust clouded the air, mixing with cries of pain. When the dust settled, 3 corpers lay still, their lives snuffed out in an instant, their laughter replaced by silence. Others moaned, clutching bruised limbs or cradling broken bones. Rescuers arrived quickly, villagers and passers-by pulling the injured from the wreckage with careful hands. But as they counted the survivors, one was unaccounted for, Nonso. "Maybe he was thrown from the bus," one corper said, his voice shaky. "Or burned in the fire," another whispered, shuddering at the thought. But Nonso wasn't dead. He had slipped away from the crash, the black bag clutched to his chest, his legs carrying him far from the twisted metal and the cries of his peers. His heart pounded with fear and guilt, the crown in his bag heavier than ever as if it carried the weight of the lives lost. As he fled, the shadow of his greed trailed behind, a silent promise of more to come. Nonso hurried away from the wreckage, his feet moving fast as if the wind itself pushed him forward. After hours of walking, his clothes dusty and torn, he found another bus heading to his city. Relief washed over him as he climbed aboard, the bag still tight against his chest. The new bus rolled smoothly at first, and Nonso leaned back, his mind drifting to the money he'd make selling the crown, enough to erase his debts, to build a future. But soon, the bus began to tremble. "Driver, what's happening?" a passenger called out, alarmed. The driver hit the brakes hard, but the bus didn't slow. It swerved off the road and jerked to a stop, throwing passengers forward. "The brakes failed," the driver said, shaking his head in disbelief as shouts of frustration filled the air. The passengers climbed out, stretching their legs while the driver checked the damage. Nonso stayed quiet, his pulse racing. He felt a gnawing sense that something was wrong, but he clung to the crown, unwilling to let it go. Hours later, after repairs, he finally reached home, the bag a heavy burden as he stepped inside. His youngest brother Toba ran to him, all smiles and energy. "Brother Nonso," Toba called, his voice bright like a song. Nonso forced a grin, patting Toba's head. "Go play, Toba," he said, his tone clipped as he hurried to his room to stash the crown. He hid it under his bed, the golden glow, muffled by the black cloth. But trouble had already slipped into the house, quiet as a shadow. That evening, as Toba bathed, he slipped on the wet floor, his head striking a wooden shelf. He fell silent, a stillness that chilled the air. By the time the family found him, it was too late. Toba was gone. The house filled with wails, a wave of grief crashing over them. Nonso sat in a corner, his face pale, his hands shaking as he hugged his knees. Guilt gnawed at him, sharp and relentless, but he said nothing. As night deepened, strange sounds began to ripple through the house, not the cries of mourning, but something eerie. Faint whispers drifted through the rooms, ghostly and cold, making the family shiver. The wind outside howled, fierce and wild, and the air grew thick with unease. "What's happening?" Nonso's mother whispered, pulling her wrapper close. Around her shoulders, her eyes wide with fear. Then came the next blow. Nonso's father, a sturdy man who stood tall like an old iroko tree, suddenly fell ill. His body stiffened, his strength draining away until he couldn't move. "It's a stroke," Nonso's mother cried, her voice trembling as she called for the prophet, a local wise man known for his insight. The prophet arrived swiftly, his expression grim as he studied the father. "Someone has taken what isn't theirs," he said, his voice low and steady. "Until it's returned, this family will find no peace." The family exchanged puzzled, frightened looks, their minds racing. Nonso sat frozen, his heart thumping like a drum. "Who took it?" the prophet demanded, his gaze sweeping over them. I didn't take anything, Nonso lied, his words barely audible. The prophet's eyes narrowed, but he didn't press further. He left with a warning. If the stolen item isn't returned, this is just the start. As the family grieved Toba and fretted over their father, Nonso slipped to his room. He pulled out the crown, staring at its golden surface. "It's just a crown," he muttered, his voice quivering. "Tomorrow, I'll sell it and fix everything. It'll be fine." But deep down, he knew the truth. The crown wasn't ordinary, and his greed had unleashed something he couldn't tame. Morning came, the sun rising over a house heavy with loss. Nonso's resolve wavered, but his greed held firm. He wrapped the crown in its black cloth, stuffed it into his bag, and whispered, "Today, I'll sell it." His voice shook as he stepped outside, leaving his mourning family behind. He set off for the market, the road long and dusty under his feet. The bag grew heavier with each step, as if the crown resisted leaving the village. Then, odd things began to happen. From the corner of his eye, Nonso saw a shadow dart across the path. He stopped, turning to look, but nothing was there. His pace quickened, but the shadows kept pace, flickering just out of sight. "Nonso," a voice called, faint but familiar. He froze, his breath catching as he turned slowly. In the distance stood a figure, Toba, his little brother, but his eyes were empty, his face pale. "Return the crown, brother," the ghostly shape whispered, the words carried on the wind. Nonso stumbled back, his heart racing, and ran. More figures appeared, some he knew, others strangers, their faces etched with sorrow, their voices pleading for the crown's return. By the time he reached the market, Nonso thought he'd escaped, but out of nowhere, masquerades burst into view, tall, colorful figures from village law, their whips cracking through the air. "Thief!" they shouted. "Return what you stole!" A whip lashed his back, and Nonso cried out, falling as another struck. He begged, "Please, I'll return it." But to the market crowd, he was alone, thrashing on the ground, yelling at nothing. "Is he mad?" someone muttered, watching in confusion. Nonso's voice rose above the noise. "I stole the king's crown!" he shouted, tears streaming down his face. "I stole it!" The crowd gasped, whispers turning to murmurs, then shouts, "He stole from the village king!" Staggering under the unseen whips, Nonso fled to the prophet's house, his cries ringing out as the masquerades followed. He burst inside, collapsing on the floor, the room thick with the scent of herbs and smoke. "Help me," he sobbed, clutching his bag. "The masquerades won't stop. They're beating me." The prophet watched him, calm but stern. "What did you do, boy?" he asked. Nonso trembled. "I took the king's crown. It's here in my bag." The prophet shook his head, his voice grave. "Do you know what you've done? That crown is tied to the village's spirits. You've brought a curse on yourself and your family." Nonso fell to his knees. "Please, I'll return it. Just make them stop." The prophet began a ritual, chanting softly, waving leaves, and sprinkling powder over Nonso. The air stilled, and the masquerades vanished. "You have 3 days," the prophet said, his tone firm. "Return the crown to the king, or the curse will destroy you and your family. This is your only chance." Nonso nodded, gripping his bag, but as he stepped outside, the masquerades returned, their whips cracking anew. He screamed, pleading for buses to stop, but drivers passed him by, thinking him unhinged. With no choice, he began walking back to the village, each step a struggle as the unseen figures flogged him, their voices chanting, "Return the crown!" For 2 grueling days, Nonso trudged on, his body weak, his back raw from the lashes. The path stretched endlessly, the crown in his bag a burden heavier than stone. As he neared the village gates, the air thickened, and the masquerades gave one final lash before fading. Nonso stumbled in, his clothes ragged, his face streaked with sweat and tears. The villagers waited, the king at the palace gates with his elders and guards. They'd known he'd return. Thieves of the crown always did. Nonso dropped to his knees, unwrapping the crown and laying it before the king. "Forgive me, your majesty," he sobbed. "I was blinded by greed. I thought I could escape, but I've paid a terrible price." The king gazed at him, his expression calm but firm. "You've brought great pain to yourself and your family," he said. "The spirits don't forgive lightly. You've returned the crown, but the cost is steep." Nonso's heart sank as he recalled Toba and his father, tears falling as he bowed in shame. The villagers murmured, some angry, some pitying, but the king raised a hand quieting them. "He's brought back what's ours," he said. "His greed has punished him more than we could." As Nonso prepared to leave, a messenger arrived, breathless. "Your father has passed," he said. "He died this morning." Nonso's knees gave out and he crumpled, grief crashing over him like a flood. The villagers lowered their heads, feeling the weight of his loss. Nonso left the palace, each step heavy with sorrow, the burden of his actions a constant ache. He couldn't face home, not with Toba's laughter silenced, not with his father gone because of him. "I can't go back," he whispered. "What home do I have now?" He wandered until he reached a wide river near the village, its surface calm and mirror-like. Standing at the edge, Nonso stared into the water, his mind swirling with memories, the joy he'd stolen, the lives lost in the crash, the fear he'd sown. The crown, now returned, had taken everything. "I have nothing left," he said, his voice lost in the river's gentle rush. Without pause, he stepped in, the water pulling him under until he vanished, the ripples fading to stillness. When the villagers heard of Nonso's end, they shook their heads in sadness. His story spread, told by elders to children, shared by fathers with sons. "Let this be a lesson," they'd say. "Greed is a flame that burns all it touches, thief, family, future." The tale of Nonso and the stolen crown endured, eerie, warning to those tempted to defy the land's traditions and spirits. I hope you found this story engaging. If you did, please like the video, share it with loved ones, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel with the notification bell. On for more tales like this. Until next time, goodbye.